the folks who RSVP, but want to make the most of our time this afternoon with our presenters. So welcome to our very first webinar of our 2020-2021 webinar series for the Washington Passport Network. My name is Essence Russ, and I'm one of the program managers for our statewide initiatives team at the College Success Foundation. And today it's my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar with information on working with and supporting LGBTQ plus youth in foster care. We have our presenters with us today, Amy Salazar and Sara Spiers, who are both with Washington State University, Vancouver. And I will allow them to introduce themselves, and then we'll go ahead and get started, and they can share their presentation with you.
Okay, so I think I just shared the presentation, so you should all see a slide that says skill building workshop for working with and supporting LGBTQ youth in foster care. So welcome and thank you for joining us. My name is Sara Spiers, and I'm an educational advocate for a post-secondary support program at Washington State University.
Hi everyone, my name is Amy Salazar. I'm an assistant professor in human development at WSU Vancouver, and I'm also a licensed social worker in Oregon.
And before we jump in, we just kind of want to caveat a little bit about this workshop and the evolution of this workshop. It was originally created for caregivers and caseworkers in addressing the unique needs and challenges faced by LGBTQ youth in foster care. And so we modified it and changed some of the activities around to better fit this audience, to better fit y'all's needs. So after the training, we're going to upload a workbook of sorts that goes along with this training. You'll see some things are changed or some new things that we didn't go over, and that's just because of time and making it better align with what we think y'all need. Mainly, there's a huge section in the workbook we won't be going over called Myth and Reality. So please check that out when you have a chance.
Next slide, Sarah. So just want to do a quick acknowledgement that the training that you'll be taking part in today was developed in collaboration with the University of Washington, or people from the University of Washington School of Social Work and Washington State University Human Development Department, along with a lot of input from foster caregivers as well as young people who were formerly in foster care. And it was created with funding from the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Next. Okay, so we have a lot we want to cover today in our hour, but what the plan is, what our learning objectives for you all today, there are 4 of those. So essentially, we want to cover some fundamental facts and terms about the LGBTQ plus youth in the population, the community, and then we want to learn some opportunities to connect around young people's identities, learn how to address young people's personal safety and be supportive in them doing that, and also learn how to support youth in promoting their health, their safety, and their well-being. So first, we're going to start off today with just a short 3-minute video clip on a story of a young person who's in foster care whose name is Captain. And so, Sarah, do you want to go ahead and stop sharing your screen, and I'll switch over to the video. So I'm going to put that up. And again, this is just a short 3-minute video to start getting us thinking about LGBTQ youth in care.
I know a lot of youth are going to benefit from this, especially queer youth, Black young youth that may not listen to anyone else's voice, urban youth that may not listen to anyone else's voice. And I made it that way for a reason. I made it so it's familiar to you. I made it so they can watch me be a leader, and then they can feel empowered themselves.
Right now,
Caged without a key. There's not a word in the English language to describe me. 3 sisters make up this man, and without each other, they cannot survive. How could you take a part of me and expect me to cast it away? What makes of me makes this man who he is. I am black, I am woman, I am queer. Those 3 sisters make me the man I am today. My aunt used to ask me if I liked boys or girls. I was 4. I didn't like boys or girls. I liked basketball. She tried to beat the devil out of me for fear that I was possessed by gender and sexuality demons. I always have to battle on the front lines. Which sister is the strongest? I can't survive without them. They function like the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. The sisters make up Captain. Remove one, and I'm incomplete. There is no word in the English language that describes Captain. I can never be a man for the sake that I am a woman. I can never be a woman for the sake that I am black. And I can never be black for the sake that I'm queer. Sitting at the kitchen table one summer evening, my foster mother asked me, "Why are you playing football? Don't you know you're a girl?" Staying humble, I could not help but say, "I'm not a girl. I'm a football player. I play for the Fresno Warriors." I can't sit in the dark and be a hanger. The only thing in the closet are my rights. I have the right to be supported and accepted for who I am. I want you to close your eyes and your ears and open your hearts.
Okay. So there's going to be a couple things during our presentation today that we'd like for you to participate through chat. So the first question I'd just like to ask are, what thoughts or questions came up with you or for you as you were hearing Captain's story? Or even if you want to think about it, what are some ways that you think you might be able to be a positive support in a young person's life, a young person like Captain, as part of your current role? So I'll give people a couple of seconds to type in their thoughts about that. Okay, so one person said, "I see youth like Captain and I want to know how I can best support them in my advocacy work." Yeah, I think that's so important to think about how you can be an advocate. Oh, the question again. So the question that I wanted you to think about is just generally what thoughts or questions came up for you after hearing Captain's story? And then what are some ways that you envision yourself potentially being a positive support in a young person's life, a young person like Captain's life, and within your role, your professional role that you're currently serving? So some other things that people came up with are how wording or verbiage can feel new and confusing, definitely. People might have questions about how intersectionality impacts them on a daily basis and how we can be supportive. I think that's a really good point, Bethany. So the first thing we want to start off with, hopefully this starts to kind of help you think about some of the unique experiences and thoughts that young people in care who identify as LGBTQ might be experiencing. And but to kind of help us set a stage to start the conversation, we want to give you a little bit of information about LGBTQ youth in foster care. So there's not a lot of really conclusive data about how many youth, LGBTQ youth in foster care there are, but we do know from several studies that LGBTQ youth in care are far overrepresented when you compare how the percentage of LGBTQ youth in foster care versus in the general population. Some studies have found that up to 20 or more % of young people in care in certain cities identify as LGBTQ. So LGBTQ youth enter the foster care system for a lot of the same reasons as non-LGBTQ youth in care. You know, things like abuse and neglect or parental substance abuse. But LGBTQ youth also have that added layer of trauma that kind of comes along with being rejected or mistreated due to their sexual orientation or their gender identity or expression. Okay. So LGBTQ youth in care, they not only kind of face the traumas and the hard realities of being in the foster care system in general, but they also have a lot of additional stressors and challenges that are more unique to them. For example, LGBTQ youth in foster care are often placed in either discriminatory or placements with caregivers that are just unprepared, unknowledgeable, uneducated about how to meaningfully and support and be accepting of LGBTQ youth. There's a huge lack across the whole country of specialized training to help support social workers to really feel ready and skilled at being able to meaningfully support LGBTQ youth in care. And there's also an issue around healthcare. A lot of LGBTQ youth in care, particularly transgender youth, might not be receiving appropriate physical or mental health care. Both can have issues. So all of this results in fewer permanency options for LGBTQ youth in care, which means they're more likely to be placed in group homes or other residential settings, which we know have more negative outcomes. And it also really ups young people, their risk of homelessness. So we'll talk more about discrimination in a little bit later on in the presentation. Sarah?
Okay, now you should hear me. So some of y'all mentioned this when we asked you to talk about Captain's experience about language and verbiage, and there is a lot of language and verbiage to be aware of. There are many terms related to gender and sexual identity, and the packet you will receive at the end of this presentation takes a deep dive into a lot of the terms. But I wanted to provide you with a few terms that we focus on that are somewhat common or that I've heard youth use a lot in my time working with them. So I'm going to leave this slide up for probably about 30 seconds. And if there's any term up here that's new to you or you're not familiar with, you can put it in the chat and I'll explain it. I'll try to give my best definition of it. Cisgender is, I'm going to consult my dictionary so I tell you correctly. But cisgender is a person who identifies with the sex they were assigned at birth. I was born female at birth. I identify as female, so I would be a cisgender female. Two-spirit is a native term for Native youth who identify with gender roles of both men and women. It's considered a third gender identity. And gender non-binary, that will be the final one we'll look up together. It's an inclusive way to describe gender that is not exclusively male or female. So they identify on the entire spectrum. Okay, well, thank you for that. And like I said, your handout will have more of these terms so you can take a deeper dive into them. I always think that it's important to, if you're not sure, ask the youth what their identity is and go with that. Okay, so we just talked about discrimination and some common terms related to gender and sexual identity. Now I want to review experiences youth have shared about acceptance, what builds acceptance, and what are some roadblocks to acceptance. We have identified 5 overarching roadblocks that have been shared with us. And so I'm just kind of going to go over them one by one, talk about how they're a roadblock, and then provide you an example of how to avoid that roadblock or overcome that roadblock. So I'm going to start with invalidating their experience. An example of invalidating the experience would be, oh, it's just a phase, or I knew it, or you just haven't met the right guy. Say a male came out to you as gay and you tell me you just haven't met the right gal yet. So phrases like this kind of accidentally insert your own perspective on what the youth is feeling. It asserts your need to be right. The youth might interpret it as you're not hearing them. So instead you can practice an active listening technique by just say, so you're feeling, and kind of talk about how they're feeling. So you're trying to learn more about their experience and not putting your own experience, your own emotions in it. The next one is questioning. By questioning, we mean asking questions that might seem harmless, but can kind of have the opposite effect. But you're sure you're not, are you sure it's not just a phase? Or if it's someone who doesn't fit a stereotype, you could be like, well, you don't look lesbian. Instead, trying phrases like, help me understand, or how did coming out impact you or impact relationships? So kind of using how, what, when, tell me about questions can help avoid the roadblock to acceptance. Another one is using the wrong terminology. We showed you a slide about how the terminology is ever evolving. And many youth change some of their gender identities as they explore their own gender identity. So never assume you know the gender or their sexuality. Just always ask them, what would you like to be called? And then I always, if you don't know, just use they, them until you ask them the question about what they would like to be called or how they would like you to identify their gender or their name. Providing solutions, I kind of like to think of this as like the writing reflex. As adults, you have a lot of experience, but and we're like, well, here's what we want you to do, or here's how you should do it. That's also kind of invalidating their experience and showing you're not fully accepted. So instead ask, what have you considered? And just kind of be a sounding board for the youth. And then finally, judging. Judging can be reflective in questions in our body language. It can also be like, well, why didn't you tell me? You're kind of emotionally hurt, like, oh, I thought they trusted me. Instead, you could just say, well, thank you for telling me. Know that I'm here if you need anything, or I know that must have been tough for you. So you can try things like that. Okay, I don't see any questions about that, so we're going to move on, and we'll revisit these in a minute to talking about just more about discrimination.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. So, so far we hope that we've tried to give a little bit of exposure to some language and words that are more appropriate, more sensitive for LGBTQ youth in care, and how important it is to use the language that they connect with, and connecting with them about what makes sense for them. So now we want to talk a little bit about, or kind of before we go into how to have conversations with LGBTQ youth on discrimination and personal safety, we first want to just talk briefly about their experiences with being discriminated against. So the Human Rights Campaign is really great at kind of compiling data on experiences of discrimination in the LGBTQ community. And some of their studies have found things such as 92% of LGBTQ youth say that they've heard negative messages about being LGBTQ from school, the internet, or their peers. And another finding is that LGBTQ, they're twice as likely than their peers, to have experienced physical violence from assault or being kicked or shoved. And so the experiences of discrimination are not rare. Another study of LGBTQ youth and out-of-home care specifically found that over 3/4 of youth had either run away from their placements or been removed due to hostility toward their sexual orientation or gender identity in their placements. 100% of youth in this study in group homes reported experiencing verbal harassment while they were in their placements, and 70% of youth experienced physical violence in the group home. So I think these numbers are really clear on the severe need that young people in care have, the severe need that they have for being able to have inclusive, supportive placements with people who not only understand that or want to advocate and be supportive of them, but are true allies. There's a question in the chat box that says, what is SOGI? Oh, thank you, Sarah. So that's a term that means sexual orientation and gender identity and expression. It's a term that's been popping up more and more to be kind of an inclusive term for the LGBTQ community. Thanks for that question, Kinsey. Okay, Sarah, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Amy. I think I skipped one slide. Nope, I didn't. Okay, so like Amy just showed us, that their youth who identify as LGBTQ will face discrimination at some point in their lives, and they may come to you as someone who can help them think through and work through the discrimination, the emotions it brought up. And so we kind of identified 5 steps on how to have a conversation about discrimination if a student is to come to you. And then don't worry, we'll have time to kind of have a hands-on example in using these steps in an actual scenario. I do just want to pause here, and as I go along, ask questions as they pop up. We'll have time for questions at the end. Either way works for myself and Amy. So the first step is to be informed. And what that means is knowing about the realities of discrimination and personal safety for LGBTQ individuals. So, attending this webinar helps you become informed and know that this is and discrimination is a potential problem. And you're also going to learn tools and tips on how to have that conversation. This graph just kind of reiterates how the accepting versus non-accepting community. And in the beginning, I'm not too sure who said it, but there's a really great comment in the chat about youth. And it's not just about being accepted, but it's also about affirming. So taking it kind of that next level. So be informed is the first step in the conversation. The second step is to also build the teens, youth, students' awareness of discrimination and personal safety. So this means talking to the LGBTQ youth about their experiences, validating their feelings that it is unjust and unfortunate reality that they have to face this and fight this. By them coming to you, though, you can now affirm those emotions and help them think through it. So we're kind of already on the right track to have a great conversation with the youth. But validating that is just unfair. So the third step is to ask about their experience. Never assume you know exactly what they're feeling. Ask what it means. We can learn a lot more about the youth experience by just asking them, Sometimes it means sitting in silence together with them as they think through how and what they want to share. But it also has to be on their time. But by asking, you're continuing to validate. And that's a good tool to use. Discuss. Discuss ways of responding to the discrimination. You could even do this before discrimination happens. So if a student or youth discloses to you they are part of the LGBT community and it seems appropriate, or they might be worried about having to come out to someone or navigating a place in their community, you can begin a conversation on how would you like to respond if this does come up. You're kind of being proactive. That feeds into making a plan. So you kind of discuss, brainstorm various ideas, but then the final part of this conversation is to sit down and no longer have it be an abstract thought. Have it be absolute. Have it be, you know, if this happens while you're attending a class, if this happens while you're out at the community, if this happens while you're at work, then they know what to do. All right, someone left a comment. Let me see. I will add that when we repost the slides. Thank you, Nick. So that is kind of how we see the conversation unfolding. You're going to be informed. You're going to talk with the youth about their experience. You're going to ask questions. You're going to discuss, then y'all will make a concrete plan. So now Amy's going to take over and provide a scenario, and we can kind of brainstorm what this would look like in action.
And Nick, thanks for your question about the 42%. Yeah, I think the citation was missing. So that image of the 42%, do you want to go back to that for a second, Sarah?
Yeah. Give me a few clicks. This one?
Yeah, so this slide is, sorry, it was missing the description of this. So this image represents, this is also from a study that the Human Rights Campaign did that found that 42% of LGBTQ youth report living in a community that they feel is not accepting of LGBTQ people. So that's where this data is from. I'm so sorry about that. So we were originally going to do a role-playing scenario where we were going to have you all kind of start thinking a little bit about what, how you might handle a conversation with a young person who kind of came to you within your role and talked or told you about an experience of a discrimination that they had. But we don't have breakout rooms for today. So I think we might, since we don't have the opportunity to really do the role playing, maybe we'll just kind of have you all think for a second about if you were meeting with a young person. So the scenario that we'll have you think about is Jeremiah, a transgender student, was sitting in the library when a friend at the table said, "I'm just going to keep calling you Jenny because that's what I've always called you." And after class, Jeremiah was scheduled to meet with you to discuss scholarship opportunities. And when he got to your office, you could really tell that he was distressed, and he went ahead and kind of told you what happened. So think for a second. I want you to just think for a second about how do you think you would respond if this young person came and was meeting with you and talking about this experience that they had? What are some ideas that you have about how you might respond to that? So we'll let people think about that for a second. Type your answers into the chat box. And again, for those of you who haven't chatted yet, be sure to include those responses both to the panelists and the attendees so that everyone can see, unless you'd rather just us see those. So Bethany suggested just kind of starting off really acknowledging the pain and the stress and the awful situation that the young person experienced. Bethany suggested, "I'm so sorry you weren't seen and understood in that moment. Do you want to process or talk about the experience?" So Bethany, I think this is a great solution. I think there's a lot of things I see in here. One, you're validating the experience. Two, you're making yourself available, but you're also not kind of forcing the student to do anything that they don't necessarily want to do. You're making space. You're making a safe space for that young person to talk about their kind of what they've been through, and you're being there for them. So I think that's a great answer. Oh, sorry, let me scroll up a little bit. Okay, so someone else said, "Thank you for sharing that with me. I'm sorry that you experienced that. Would you like to talk more about it?" Yeah, so Kinsey, similar strengths to what Bethany suggested. I can't see all the names sometimes, but the next person said, "I'd ask him how he was feeling and how the other person's statement made him feel." Yeah, so getting some of those feelings out can be really helpful. Just making room for that experience to be validated. The next person said, "Wow, I'm so sorry that happened. That's definitely not cool for a friend to do. Do you want to talk about it?" Yeah, again, empathizing, making space for those feelings to have a space. Someone else said, "I'd empathize with that experience and ask how he was feeling, ask what he needs right now." So I think that this is another thing. So how are you feeling, making space for the feelings, but also what do you need? What can I do? What things can we fill in right here to be supportive to meet your needs in the moment? Would you like to discuss a plan moving forward? Maybe the student is feeling like they do want to do something about it. Maybe they're not feeling like they want to do something about it right now, or maybe they just need to think about it for a little while. But letting the young person know you're there to help them with that planning if they want to. Making space for self-care. So maybe not necessarily doing something about the situation if they don't want to kind of outwardly with others, but finding ways to be supportive for that student, what they can do within themselves that makes them feel safer in that situation. So I think there's a lot of really good suggestions here around validation, making space, trying to make room for young people to feel like they have someone they can go to process those feelings, as well as to connect with potential next steps, think about potential next steps that they might want to take, be a part of. So I'm sorry, everyone, that we weren't able to kind of try that out with a partner, but thank you for engaging in that and offering some ideas for things that you could do in this situation. Sarah?
So from this role play scenario, or just a group conversation about it, it seems that y'all have some great communication tips and know maybe how to validate a youth's experience, student's experience, talk to them through some hardships. But sometimes there can be roadblocks to our communication. We would say something and it comes out the wrong way, or we don't mean it to be heard a certain way. So again, we've put together identified a few roadblocks to communication. A lot of these roadblocks, while we think are relevant to any individual who works with LGBTQ plus youth in foster care, it was kind of geared more toward the caregiver role, but we think two really stand out as good roadblocks to try to avoid. So there's gonna be 6 or 7 on the screen. Giving orders, providing solutions, and I'm just gonna talk about 2 of them. We're gonna revisit providing solutions. That was also kind of a roadblock to acceptance, but it can also be a roadblock to communication. But when you start providing solutions or tell them how you would do it, the conversation will stop. They'll probably just zone out. So again, as a reminder, as a way to try to avoid that roadblock, just help them discuss their ideas, be there for them, make yourself available, like y'all said and Amy said. You're there as an adult, you could offer maybe advice, but don't give solutions. If they ask you for advice, you could provide it, but if they don't ask, I always think it's best to just get them to the point of making the decision. And then another one would be assuming you know the other person's feelings. We don't truly know how someone else is feeling or how an experience impacted them. You could instead and say, oh, I can see that that has hurt you. So just you kind of use and mirror their language and their emotional terms they use to validate and not kind of put your emotions on them. Explanations for the other ones will be given in the handout that you'll receive after the webinar. Okay, so a tool to try to just another tool to try to completely avoid a roadblock to communication is active listening. And I know I can't see you all, but I assume I was going to get y'all to give a thumbs up if you have heard of active listening. But given your responses to our group activity, I think y'all are somewhat familiar with active listening. So I'm going to go over the 4 steps and then we'll have another group activity. So active listening is listening and asking questions. So kind of just sitting there in silence or sitting there and letting the youth or the student talk about whatever experience they want to talk about, and you asking open-ended questions. You can show curiosity and care and acceptance through your questions. When you are asking your questions or validating the experience, it's best to try to use I statements. And we'll get more to that in a minute, but I statements are statements about what you think, feel, or want. They're statements you say about yourself that give information about yourself that no one can argue with. So they don't put anyone on a defense. And then paraphrasing, kind of summarizing what you heard. I always like to, when a student and I have had a really deep conversation, paraphrase, summarize what I heard, and then I'll say, did I hear this correctly? Is there anything else you want to add? Did I mishear anything correctly? And then give them a time to respond. So those are kind of the 4 overarching steps of active listening. So I'm doing an I statement activity because sometimes I statements can be a little tricky. It will be a you statement, but you think it's an I statement. So we're just going to try 3 out and use the chat feature to respond. So a you statement is going to pop up, and then I'm going to ask you all to type in the chat box how you would make it an I statement. And then we'll just kind of do this 3 times. Okay, so how would you make "you do great work" an I statement? Just type in the chat box what you think you know. Well, I'm impressed with the work you do. That's great. I feel like you're doing great work. I've noticed the great work you do. They are your thoughts, your feelings, your observations. I've noticed the great work you do. I'm impressed with the work you do. I'm glad you came to me. Those are all great. I appreciate the great work you do. Yeah, so you're giving them your emotions, your thoughts behind the action. I'm really pleased with your effort, was just the example we gave. Okay, one more. I've been noticing that you've been doing outstanding work. Those are all really great ways to kind of let them know how you feel and that you're seeing them. Okay, so the next one would be "you're late." I think this one's a little trickier. Okay, I've noticed you didn't show up on time. Is there something going on that I can help with? That's awesome, because you're showing what you've noticed and what you're feeling, and you're going to provide help because maybe you don't know why they're late. So turn it into a question. I'm concerned about you not showing up on time. Do you want to talk about it? I get concerned when you're not on time to our meetings. Great. I really like how you took that question and in that statement, and instead of just kind of making it accusatory, you're opening up space and allowing them opportunities because maybe there's something going on in their life you're not aware of. So we've said, I've been worrying about you because you were late. I wish you would have called me and told me you were going to be late. So all along the lines of what you all said, but I really liked how you turned it into a question as well. So the final one we'll try together is, you're not listening to me. I'm not feeling heard right now. I feel unheard at the moment. Those are awesome. Again, kind of bringing in your emotions, bringing in your feels. You want to be heard. So this is how I'm feeling. This is what I want. And I think with I statements, a really cool thing about them is you're kind of mirroring communication strategies with the youth as well. They really learn and absorb a lot about communication by looking at adults. And then one other person says, I would love to have an opportunity to be heard when you are ready. Oh, I really like that, giving them, this is what I want. When you're ready, I'll resume this conversation. I feel that you haven't been listening to me. Is there something distracting you? Again, turning it into a question so no one goes on the defense. Awesome. Okay, so Donna says there is something in the Q&A.
Yeah, Sarah, I'll pull that one up. So we had a question from Samantha that said, I heard that sometimes we can say to clients, I can't imagine how that feels, to be honest, and how we don't know what they're feeling. So if we're thinking about, for example, if young people are telling you about times that they've been discriminated against, maybe you're kind of hearing what they're saying, and you haven't been in that position. So let's see. So Samantha's saying, sometimes saying to clients, I can't imagine how that feels, to be honest, and how we don't know what they're feeling, and to not assume they're feeling. However, with youth, they come to us for guidance. So I was wondering if it's recommended to not say that we may not understand their feeling. Samantha, I think that's a great question. I think that there's a couple of things going on here. One, I think you do want to acknowledge when you haven't been in someone else's shoes, you can't really understand what it is they're going through. But I also think, particularly for youth, it can feel very, I don't know if I want to say scary or alienating to kind of feel like, oh my God, something's happening to me that's so bad that no one else has kind of experienced that. That can feel scary, I think, or thinking about that can feel scary. So I think maybe one thing that you could do is say, I've never had that experience exactly the way that you've had it, and that must have been really scary. However, something, maybe you share a experience, if you're comfortable doing so, and if it seems appropriate, maybe sharing an experience that has been scary or scary or discriminatory for you, to kind of find a common ground where the two of you can have a somewhat shared experience, while also still acknowledging that you can't connect directly, but that you've had those similar experiences before too, and maybe even talking about, if the youth wants to, some of the ways that you've kind of dealt with those things or processed those things on your own, potentially, if the youth wants to hear about that. So I think that those could be a couple of ways to kind of think about that. Okay, Sarah, back to you.
Okay, that was great.
Yeah. Oh, do we want to fit in sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's where I was going to next. So y'all did great. And so we have time. We weren't too sure if we were going to have time. So there's one other slide, kind of toolkit thing I want to share. But before we go there, we've talked about we've talked about tools for our toolbox of roadblocks to acceptance. So how we ask questions, the language we use, and to not provide solutions, but just to provide a space for them. We've talked about the importance of communication and I statements, active listening, reflective practices. So the final activity you could do with a student would be having this emergency contact card. And this kind of goes back to when we are thinking about what are some things we could do to help make a plan, or a tangible way to make a plan with a student. And so one idea would be an emergency contact card. This would be, a business card size. They can keep in their wallet, keep in their purse.
They could also put it directly in their phone, right? Like if they don't have the paper stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. If they have cell phones, they can make a note in their phone. You can keep a copy. With some of the students I work with, I have a copy of their emergency contacts, because I know a phone might get lost. So I'll kind of try to keep the numbers organized, so they can try to access me at some point. So the caregiver name, a social worker if they don't have a caregiver. It could just be a caring adult who's always in their life. Their social worker, someone at the school, someone at their work, a friend or relative. So these are just kind of common caring adult contact points, but it could be any adult really in their life for people. Sometimes addresses help. And then always to remind them in a dire situation, it's okay to dial 911 if needed. Okay, Amy.
Okay, so just a couple of kind of several things to keep in mind as young people kind of begin to or continue to explore and develop their own sexual and gender identities. Is there's an what do you call these acronym? CARE, for a way to remember just some key points. So the first one, C, is that children and youth naturally question and explore their sexual orientation and gender identities and expression. And you can just be there as an ally and a person to support that exploration. The A is acceptance and openness, and I'll add an allyship as well, are critical to helping young people feel safe, feeling like they have those people that hear, that connect, that can really be supportive of that. Our resources and support are available, letting young people know resources and support are available, that they don't have to do this alone. They're not the only young people out there that are exploring their sexual orientation, gender identity expression. And also that everyone wants to feel like they're, excuse me, everyone wants to feel like they belong and that they're loved. And for some youth, it's a lot harder to find that place where they feel like they belong and that they feel loved. So anything that you can do through your work with young people to help them find that place for them, those places for them, can make a huge difference. Okay, so just a couple of kind of final pieces today. There's a couple of publications that we have written on this training. And again, today we kind of crammed a whole lot of information in a much shorter time. So we probably weren't able to cover everything as wonderfully as we would have if we would have had more time. So we wanted to give you as much information as you could, but there's more, as Sara said at the beginning, in the resource that will be sent out. These publications you see here are also kind of more of a sciencey look at how these were developed and how young people and foster caregivers gave their input on their development. This link that's on this slide I think is actually incorrect, but there is a training. Oh, it does? Okay. So there's actually an online training that the Alliance for Child Welfare Excellence has at the University of Washington with the DCYF has created. It's an e-learning that's free and available to social workers, to foster caregivers, that covers some of the same information we covered today, available online. So we wanted to make you aware of that as well. And I'm going to pause here and see, we have a few minutes for questions. I want to say, I know some people when Q&A time comes up, they kind of head out. I would like to ask, and I'll go ahead and put the link in for our evaluation.
Amy.
Okay, thank you. We do have a survey we'd love for you to fill out to give us some feedback on kind of our shortened version of this training, which again, that today is our first time of doing this one, the shorter version, but wanted to go ahead and put that link on there. If you'd all, we'd really appreciate it just to take, it's 20 questions. It'll take you 2 minutes or less, maybe 3 to fill it out. But I do want to open it up for the last few minutes to have at least a little bit of time to talk about any questions that came up for people.
Amy, I don't know if you saw it, but one person was asking about resources for transgender youth. What would you recommend to increase their knowledge with those youth?
Oh, that's a great question, Kinsey. We put some resources together for the, if you look at our, the kind of PDF version of the training that you'll be receiving by email today, there are some resources listed in there, but you could also email me directly, which I think—
I'll go to that slide.
Next slide.
Yeah.
So my email address is here, amy.salazar@wsu.edu. I'd be happy if you want to connect by email. I can help connect you with some more resources that could be helpful. So I just want to give people time. Any other questions that came up for you that you want to bring up or that we want to talk about now? Okay, well, I don't see any. If you're in the middle of typing one, go ahead and finish that out. But again, I mentioned if you'd all please be willing to go to that link that Sarah's posted for a brief survey on this training so that we can get your feedback on kind of doing this 1 hour quick and dirty version of it. That'd be really helpful to us. Again, be sure to check out that on the e-learning that's available through the Alliance as well. Oh, the question for Gabriella is, can anyone access the training? Gabriella, are you referring to the e-learning with the Alliance? If you are, yes, anyone can go on and create an ID. There's no, I mean, you have to set up a login, but there's no, I mean, anyone can do that to be able to access the training. So it is openly available to anyone. And it's very interactive. It's really cool. There's a lot of visual, like really cool stuff. And we've tried to make it applicable to caregivers, to caseworkers, to a lot of different audiences. So. Okay, well, I haven't seen any other questions come up, so I think we might just kind of wrap things up here. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. We really appreciate you being here. And again, if you wouldn't mind just taking the last couple minutes to do those surveys, we'd appreciate it. And I'll hand it back over to Essence.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah and Amy, for taking the time out of your day to share your knowledge. Thank you to everyone who attended on the behalf of the Washington Passport Network. And as Amy and Sarah mentioned several times throughout the presentation, we will be sharing out the PDF, which will include handouts with more information, more resources for you to access. And in addition to their high-level survey, you'll receive a very short, I mean like 3 or 4 question survey immediately following the close of this webinar from the Washington Passport Network that will be focused just on objectives and whether or not you felt that the objectives for this webinar were met. So with that, if I don't see any other questions in the chat, we appreciate you all for spending this time with us on this Wednesday. And we will see you at our next webinar, December 9th, same time, 2 to 3 p.m. Thanks so much, everyone.